Heck yeah.
We went to parties yesterday. It was awesome.
All right, guys, time to listen up. Get your books out. We had a great presentation over Exodus yesterday, and so today, Sam, are you ready to present Leviticus?
Absolutely.
Good luck.
I don't need luck.
Okay.
Okay. I'm done.
Hey, wake up, guys. Applause. Great job, Sam. Great job. So can anyone tell me what Sam talked about?
I can't.
Besides Sam. Okay, I'll go ahead and explain it really quick. So basically, Leviticus, the whole point of this book is to show how these sinful Israelites can be near God's presence, because God cannot be in the midst of sin, and so God creates this way for the Israelites to be not in His presence, but close to His presence and live amongst them. So God is basically living in this tabernacle, this big tent. His presence is dwelling in there in the beginning of Leviticus, and He gives us three different ways, or solutions to how we can be near His presence. Okay, the book is split up into 7 different sections, and each one of those solutions takes up 2 sections. And so the first part is these rituals. So God gives Moses all of these rules about all these different offerings that he's supposed to, that the people of Israel are supposed to do, whether they're burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, sin offering, guilt offering. All of these, some of these say thank you to God, and some say I'm sorry to God. And there's very detailed instructions on exactly what kind of animals and stuff they're supposed to use. So and over here with rituals, God basically describes these festivals that He wants the Israelites to celebrate, to kind of retell the story of bringing them out of Egypt and out of slavery, and how God kind of restored them and rescued them. And so there's detailed instructions on how to celebrate these. So then that brings us to this idea of the priesthood. And now, since being in or close to God's presence is really dangerous, He appoints priests to go into His presence on behalf of the Israelites, to do these offerings and all this different kind of stuff, because not everyone can go in there because it's very dangerous, right? Okay, so this section kind of shows how priests are ordained and everything that goes along with that. And over here, God kind of sets out some guidelines of how priests should live. They were supposed to live to a much higher standard than even the Israelites were living themselves, because they worked so closely to God's presence. So there's all these rules here for what priests are supposed to do. And then that brings us to the purity laws. It was really important for the Israelites to know whether they were clean or unclean, or also staying pure or impure. It was important for them to know this because if they are in a pure state, they're allowed to be near God's presence. And if they're in an impure state, they are not allowed to be near God's presence. And it basically shows certain animals that the Israelites can eat and touch, and certain ones that they can't. It doesn't really say why they can't. We just know that avoiding them sets Israel apart, and it shows that God's holiness should affect every single part of their lives. And over here, this purity part of the book talks about moral purity, morality, and all that stuff, and social justice, healthy relationships, sexual integrity. Curtis, please, no laughing. All of these will make them moral people, and so that they can stay in a pure state. And it's not necessarily a bad thing for them to be in an impure state. All they would have to do is shower, wait a couple of days, do some of the sacrifices, and they would be pure again. But it would definitely be inappropriate for them to be in an impure state and be near God's presence, because that would not be good. So that brings us to the last sort of middle section of this book. It's called the Day of Atonement. And this part, basically there was a lot of sin going on in Israel, and a lot of sin was going unnoticed, and people weren't dealing with it or doing sacrifices the right way or whatever. And so God creates this day for the priest to come and bring him 2 goats. And one of the goats is slaughtered, and his blood runs into God's presence, and it's basically symbolizing the blood covering for Israel's sins and atoning for their sins. And the other goat, the priest lays hands on that goat, confesses all the sins of the people to that goat, and then banishes that goat out into the wilderness, and he's never to come back again. So it's like their sins are gone, and God has forgiven them. So that is basically the book of Leviticus. It really shows God's love for his people. He wants to be near his people. He wants to be in contact with his people. He loves them a lot, so he gives them these certain guidelines and detailed instructions of how they can stay close to him. So are there any questions? Yes, Lauren.
So how does all of this relate to us?
Yeah, like Jesus isn't even in this book. Like why? Like why is this important?
Those are really good questions. Can anybody answer that?
I can try.
Jessica?
Yeah.
Sure, go
Can I
ahead.
get up
Yeah, absolutely. Come on up.
Okay, so it's really cool because, like, if you look at how Sam laid this out, which Sam did a really good job, you can look about how, like, the rituals, it, like, turns into, like, relationship. So, like, when Jesus comes, like, all these things of, like, these burnt offerings, like, we don't have to do this anymore because Jesus was that one offering that sacrificed it all and was covering all of that. So it was, like, really cool that, like, once Jesus came, the rituals were no longer, and, like, all we have to do is accept Christ. Like, how cool is that? And then, like, in priesthood, like, they were called to be set apart, right? Because they had to do all these things and they were ordained. And then, like, I know in the 2 New Testament, they talked about how, like, we were called to, like, a royal priesthood, which was, like, God's people, and, like, a holy nation. So, like, that's what we're called to now, like, as people that are not the Israelites, but later in the future when Jesus called us to be his holy nation. Like, that's super cool, like, how that reflects as well. And then in purity, like, Jesus always, in all of his actions, like, always sought purity with people. Like, in his relationships, and the way that he talked to people, and the way he treated people, like, he always sought to be clean and to be pure. And, like, even in his relationships with others, like, he was able to reflect that moral morality that we need to be following. So it's, like, super cool. And then even on the Day of Atonement, like, that was, like, the one day that covered everything, like, for that whole year. But all the more, like, when Jesus died, like, that was a once and for all kind of covering sin offering, that blood was poured out, like what Mr. Stern was talking about. How cool is that, of, like, the second goat, the goats or whatever, like, that was what was the substitute, but Jesus was the substitute. Like, oh, I love it. It was so good. So, yeah. Does it help? Does it make sense? Or no?
Fantastic job.
Thanks.